even when you create something and put it up on your website and it's free to access, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's free for someone to come and take your content, be those words or an image. Creating these large language models is not an inconsiderable task. Like, the barriers are super high, right? It's really expensive. So you need a lot of investment, hundreds of billions of dollars to even get onto the starting point. You can spend tens of thousands of dollars on this stuff.
We do.
And you might not ever use it for any commercial purpose.
No.
And nor will anyone else, by the way.
Welcome to another episode of Startup Journeys Founders Unplugged. I'm Paul King, your host, and today we have a special guest joining us. He's an accomplished director and cross-functional leader specializing in new product development, business development, and commercial product leadership. He's a trusted business and strategic advisor to CEOs, and is known for building strong relationships with senior stakeholders. His collaborative mindset and problem-solving approach have made him a valuable asset in the startup landscape. Today we're diving deep into some critical topics that will benefit early-stage founders. Our guest will share insights on navigating copyright and intellectual property complexities, financial tips for startups, and the world of patents. So hi Richard, and welcome to the Startup Journeys Founders Unplugged podcast. So you've had a pretty diverse career. So can you start by telling us a bit about yourself and your journey from your background in digital media to the entertainment industry and to your current role in ed tech and education publishing and copyright as well?
Just in terms of my background, I've always had a strong interest in media and entertainment. I started off life as a chartered accountant, actually, and realized it was so I'm quite sort of financially cluey, but realized it wasn't for me long term. But I made the move to work for a record label, Warner Music UK, many years ago, and spent some years there in the finance department, and then moved out. I did an MBA for a year, then came back into another music company in London that I was involved in helping go through what became a management buyout at the time of the Internet 1.0 era, which was a physical and digital music wholesaler. So it was right on the cusp of all the new digital streaming activities. Came to Australia in 2003.
Right.
This year,
so 20 years ago.
and spent some years in the digital media and entertainment section of Telstra, what was sometimes called Telstra Media, other times was Big Pond Media, but it was an area that developed a raft of products and services based around sport, movies, entertainment. So from physical DVDs by mail, right, like the Netflix model from the early days, through to digital delivery through IPTV boxes and this sort of thing. But the last 6+ years, I've been working in the copyright agency, which was, which is owned by traditional publishers, call them traditional and online publishers, owners of the written word and also visual images as well.
So, Richard, I know earlier in your career you were actually involved in a startup, helping to grow it. Tell us a little bit about that, and like how much funding did they have, and how did it go, and how long did it take, and what strategies did you use for growing that? Or you also mentioned around pricing. How did you work that out? Because pricing is a big issue with a lot of startups. When I had mine, I had no idea how much to charge.
Yeah. Okay. So the startup was an email newsletter publication, daily newsletter publication for the steel industry. So I knew nothing about the steel industry, but nonetheless it was digital media and it was publishing. So it was sort of within my wheelhouse, as it were, from that perspective in terms of interest. The actual product had been developed when it was part of this metals marketplace I was telling you about previously. So there was already something that existed, so that didn't need to be built, although it still required further work and continuous improvements.
Yeah.
And it had some interested readers. So there was a need to take the infrastructure that had been developed, keep the content being developed, and try and charge some of those existing customers and find new customers, and quickly. So the capital put into it was really low. Like it was about, people probably hate hearing this sort of stuff. Anyway, it was about, at the time, about $80,000 between two of the main founders.
Yeah.
And and it was enough to sort of keep people employed on and give them shares, and everyone was earning small amounts of money. Okay. So it was run on the traditional oil you rag smell. But what was interesting, selling subscriptions to a newsletter. So not selling monthly subscriptions, they have to be annual. So we immediately got the pricing right for that. There was no sort of $10 a month kind of thing. It was you had to buy a year. That was okay, because it meant that every sale sort of gave us another X months to keep running. I mean, not that many, probably. Yeah. We were getting, we could spend all the monthly subscription sales that were coming in within sort of 6 to 8 weeks. So we were on the hamster wheel trying to get through the first year. So all those would then get renewals coming in, and then we could keep adding on, and then it could slowly build. So that's how we were financing it. Okay. So it was quite precarious, and nonetheless, customers were there, they were engaging, they were reading the newsletters, and more were coming on board. The first thing that struck me was that we had a guy from one of the main banks who was really keen on the product, really happy with it, but he was only paying, his bank was paying something like £120 a year for all the information that he was then using to process and quote in, reports that were then going off for decision making, involving, investment in large companies and in whatever it could be, M&A and all sorts of stuff. So, it just looked disproportionately wrong, like the amount of value this guy was getting. You get into an organization, you make one sale of £120, and it's not, it just ain't enough. These are large enterprises who are making steel, or they're, involved in some part of the supply chain. It was pretty crazy. So the first thing was, it was about segmenting your customers and making sure you're pricing it right, and understanding the value you're delivering to your customer. Now, first thing, if someone's sharing emails around an organization where there's lots of people employed, you want to try and ensure that you're getting wide coverage of all those people. So pretty quickly we moved to the concept of offering a discount but selling lots of seats, and it's an account, and you can take that approach, and we were able to start selling at an account level, which was for large steel companies, and that was much better. It was much better use of time, and far more effective in that it was a product they were interested in and could quite quickly apply a sense of value to. And there were other products in the market that have been around, subscription journals, this kind of thing. So you could also kind of get a bit of a sense of what that was worth to them. So this was good. It provided a way of just simply increasing the revenue coming in for different accounts, and closing out this kind of loop of single people just registering and then sharing newsletters. The second thing was, it just simply wasn't enough. So did a bit of further product development, and then came out with new pricing to offer more value, which was good, but significantly ramping up. And actually it showed fairly quickly that the pricing was relatively, it was fairly inelastic, because these organizations were quite happy to keep paying for it, and it still wasn't that much in the grand scheme of things. And for those that were like working in the finance world, investment bankers, a way around that was to then charge a non-industry rate. So we just developed all these different rates, and they were happy to pay. Like they didn't care. It was a small amount of money in the first place. So you need to sort of upsize it to meet the demands of each segment and make sure you get the pricing right. And that was critical. And that's what got it ultimately up and running with wind in its sails and cash coming into the business. So in many ways, the product hadn't changed that much. It was about segmenting your customer base, going after low-hanging fruit to start with, and making sure that it was high-value customers you're going after.
Yeah, I'm just thinking just around that, pricing. Like a lot of startups, as I said, they really struggle to get the price right. I did also in my startup, particularly at the beginning. And it's a bit of a lot of us just take a bit of a guess. We sort of know the value, but a lot of startups, when they're starting, they think, oh, if I charge too much, no one's going to buy it or take it on or use my service.
Yeah, so you end up selling it too cheaply.
Sorry?
Set a bar in the marketplace, and then everyone thinks that's how much it costs.
Yeah.
So you can. There are ways around it where you can perhaps offer free trials. It's not a novel concept. None of this stuff is rocket science, but there are ways of doing it, and you have to understand the value. What's the alternative that could be used? With your startup, for example, we were just talking about this the other day. It rather depends on who's using the virtual reality
training
platform. So, the higher the value of that target customer base, the better. And if it's something that can be managed easily, low cost, then it may not be the right place to start. Maybe it's some, I don't know, mining operation somewhere where people are in tunnels and they need to recreate that. Maybe it's the surgeon in the theatre or whatever it may be.
That's a good point. That's a good point, because we're in the hospitality space, and although they absolutely loved what we had and saw the value, they were very hesitant to spend anything on it. Because that's margins are tight in that space,
margins are tight. There's going to be churn, and bring someone up with it, and off they go to the next bar.
Many startups, they're built around innovative content, and safeguarding intellectual property is crucial. Could you provide advice to early stage founders on how to navigate copyright and IP considerations when developing their products or services?
Yeah. Okay. Well, that copyright in the sense of content that you've created, that's covered under the Copyright Act in Australia. And by the way, there are different copyright legal regimens in every different country. So you need to be aware of that when you get started. Some of them are similar, some of them aren't.
Bit of a minefield.
But don't assume it's always exactly the same in every territory. And for example, the United States can be quite different. But when you create something and put it up on your website and it's free to access, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's free for someone to come and take your content, be those words or an image or whatever it is that you've created that you own copyright in, and go and use them for another purpose. Right. So that's really important to remember that. So you should always include in your terms and conditions. And by the way, I should say I'm not a lawyer, by the way. I'm not offering legal advice, but it's worth making sure that you protect that copyright. You own it, you've created it, and it's as long as it's your own creation and you haven't copied it from someone else. But if it's your own creation, it is your copyright. And copyright is, as I understand, given automatically in Australia. You don't need to go and register it anywhere or whatever. There's no sort of obligation from that point of view. I think for anyone who's creating their own content, you've got to know it's yours and it's not there to be freely accessed and used by others unless you want it to be, and you make that clear. At the end of the day, it's your content if you own it and have created it. So what we're seeing at the moment with the large language models that are being trained on large data sets. Those large data sets are essentially created from crawling the entire internet, right? So visiting gazillions of web pages, looking at content and using it to then generate natural language styles. I've got to get the words right, but
ChatGPT, that type of
thing. It's like ChatGPT, and there's a number of them out there, and it's not creating these large language models is not an inconsiderable task. Like the barriers are super high, right? It's really expensive. So you need a lot of investment, hundreds of millions of dollars to even get onto the starting grid. And what they're doing is going out and using someone's intellectual property in many instances to then train their model and their algorithm.
And so what happens with that? Like, what's going to happen with that? Like, so many copyright issues with that. Like, how are they going to deal with that?
It's sort of mass infringement, I suppose. From I don't know. I'm happy to be argued otherwise, but it looks like if you're taking and using someone's content for a commercial purpose, I would presume that's infringement. But again, I'm not a lawyer, but it looks like. What are the remedies? I mean, like, it's hard, isn't it? Because you can't unscramble the omelette or put the toothpaste back in the tube or use those kind of metaphors.
Exactly.
It's and there is a need to sort of get ahead as well. I mean, you want your nation to be one of the ones that's racing forwards and smart and having the advantage. But at the same time, there's no consultation from the outset. So I think it's going to be another one of those, apologize later and ask for forgiveness when you're already on your way to creating a new business. I think there's, everything's being tested at law at the moment. So there's all sorts of instances of authors who in the United States who are in court now. Lots of different examples and around the world as well. And we'll see. But I think there's sort of two things. There's some sort of remedy for the misdeeds that have happened, and they've happened. So I don't think there's anything you can do to sort of unscramble that learning. I've seen something that Microsoft had where I think it was Microsoft where they said, you can, if you don't want your intellectual property to be used going forwards, you've got to, you have to opt in proactively and say what it is, and maybe that's not to be used in the future, but it's already been used. So
would you say? I was just thinking now, let's say in my lifetime, I've learned lots of things, I've read lots of things, I've listened to lots of things, and then using all of that knowledge, I'll create something, right? Wouldn't it sort of be the same type of thing, really? It's just
I agree. And I think it's this is the the issue, and it's one of the arguments that's put forward. Every musician or visual artist is invariably informed and influenced by their, the knowledge they developed over years of studying other musicians and artists by listening to them or looking at their, that's how we as humans operate. But I suppose these aren't humans who are using the content, right? They're reproducing at scale in a commercial environment that is highly, there's compute costs but it nonetheless happens. It's beyond the contemplation of what we've understood before. And it's at a vast scale. In this instance, we have creations being made that are influenced by the sort of mass ingestion and processing of these works. There's no intellectual property that's been, I don't think yet, that's been assigned to anything that's been created by a generative AI engine, call them that.
That was something else I was thinking. Like, as a startup, you may produce a whole lot of different content using AI or chat, etc., and then so you can't really apply copyright to that, or how could you prove that?
So I don't think so thus far, the view is that copyright was applied to things that humans created, not machines. So that seems to have been the way it's landed so far. That would be particularly egregious if you're a struggling author or artist and you're seeing similar works being created and being commercialized in a way.
They can write an ebook in like 1 minute.
Well, that's right. So I'm interested to see how how you determine whether your work has been used or not. I mean, some people say they think they can do that. I've just played around a little bit on ChatGPT and asked it questions about, did you use this or did you use that? And it's a relatively sort of a few kind of response that doesn't necessarily tell you too much, other than we just look at the accessible internet and that's it.
Well, I've heard from somebody that you can actually say, give me the references for this, and it actually does that. And there's another app,
that's good.
I can't remember the app that actually gives you references every time. But they might give you, say, 6 references, but I'm sure that there'd be a whole lot more. Like you said, they're gathering information from everywhere. So that might be the main things they're relying on. But and then I imagine you'd actually need AI to figure out if it's a human or an AI that wrote that, or maybe you can't.
Well, that's right. I mean, I've read things that say you can, and it's pretty obvious usually. For example, in education, whether it's students, I mean, plagiarism has always been a thing, and there've been websites like or services like Turnitin that will check the veracity of the student's submission. Let's say. It's the same sort of thing. I don't know how effective they are, but one thing I will say is, I mean, I think perhaps there needs to be some level of remedy for what has already happened, and then there needs to be a second remedy going forwards for what's continuing to happen, and there needs to be some sort of opt-in to whether you're part of that. Opt-in, by the way, maybe you can enforce it yourself by preventing your website from being scraped if you have content that's accessible to anyone online. Or even behind a paywall, so there's ways of getting around that. How do
you prevent your website from being scraped?
There are ways of doing it, I understand. Again, I've just read this, so I know that some websites have now, maybe it's a notification to the big, OpenAI.
Oh, okay.
ChatGPT or whoever it is to not come and scrape my website.
Okay.
So there's perhaps it's something like that. It's an official, you must not do this, and it's part of the terms and conditions of using the website, which of course are always important. If you can make that clear, then they shouldn't be doing it. And then why did you do it? And then it's sort of getting to a more substantive legal response, I would imagine.
And the space is changing every second. I mean, I think 2 days ago, Elon Musk launched Grok, which is another AI engine that also scrapes or uses everything on Twitter. And
that's right. I saw.
Sarcastic answers. Like, that's so typical Elon.
Yeah, it's user-generated content. And it's being commercialized. I mean, I don't know what the terms and conditions are when you sign up for Twitter, or X, but presumably it's that you don't own any of the content.
I think nearly all the social media platforms are like that.
I should imagine fair, all social media. So it's sort of it's a fair game, unless someone else owns the copyright in it, and then it gets complex.
It's a real minefield, isn't it? So I guess watch this space.
If you've got an interesting niche that you've developed, I mean, I think that developing an application around your content is an interesting place to explore using artificial intelligence, generative AI. Now, what I mean by that is if you've got content that's based around a particular domain of expertise or subject matter expertise, you've got a lot of content there, and what you can do is take a language model that already speaks can write in English in a fluent kind of way and apply some level of analytics to it whereby it's making sense. You could take that and apply it, train it on your content. If maybe that's not for a startup founder, but maybe a startup founder has created their own content in a niche, and that could be a way of developing an application around it. I'm thinking of perhaps more, if you're a publisher and you've got journals or you've been publishing content for many years on a certain specific area, then it gives you the opportunity to use those large language models to generate content for you based on your insights that you've got, but you want them ringed off and You want it to be your IP that's being used and only for a specific purpose and not for being shared with others around the world and this sort of stuff. So you want to ring fence your content and put it, certainly legally bulletproof it if you can, as best as you can, and also put sort of constraints around, to protect the content, but also to develop applications that based around that might be of value to customers.
Okay.
And you probably need ChatGPT-4, I think, for that. But I would say that being able to create vertical applications based on your own intellectual property, if you've collected lots of content in a specific subject matter area, will be an interesting opportunity. And also, that if you are if you've created a business that uses artificial intelligence, you have to be mindful about some of the assurances you provide of the outputs, know who your customers are, who the customer segments are. And if you're, my first point, I think, was, if you are creating intellectual property, which is whatever it is you're putting up that's accessible to the world, then you need to ensure you've protected it in some way, shape or form through words.
Yeah. Could you share a specific setback or failure from your career, particularly related to maybe product development or commercial leadership, and how it has shaped your approach to future projects or decision making?
I suppose the biggest one, I was involved in this management buyout business a few years ago, and that was the internet 1.0 era.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a mixture of some existing businesses and some future forward businesses. So there was some technology that had been developed jointly with IBM at the time that then was developed and packaged up as an offer for broadcasters to use, offering digital music so that they could access it online and find what they're looking for and bring it into their production suite. And then the physical side of things was a wholesale business, shipping, pick, pack and ship to retailers. So there was a sort of mixture of business, but at a time when, my biggest learning was the financing is when you're in a bull market like that, you need to know that the music will stop at some point, and it did abruptly. So you can't keep. So one aspect of the failure was just sort of being able to lose money when you need to, and focusing only on the top line when the music did stop, and then we needed to react quickly, and that was very difficult. So eventually the organization got put into receivership, and I'd already left it at that stage. But that's one of the things, and it wasn't just the finance though; it was also how some of the existing operation was running as well, and just not having a strong grip on financial control grip. Also, back to that point about products as well. But the products that we developed for the broadcast sector it looked great, and we could talk about it on paper. It was fantastic. But then you realise some of the customers didn't have enough bandwidth to get. There's some of these sort of very early issues of the internet. So it's great, but then they're unable to access it, so they go back to using CDs again, and so it's about. It's just a mix of running and having good names on your customers and this sort of thing, but then you do need to make sure they're having a good, successful time with your products as well.
But that's an interesting point. That's an interesting point because same with our business. We're in the VR sector in 2017, right? We started then, and that was like getting phones and putting them into these dodgy headsets. And I remember doing a demonstration once with a boardroom with 8 phones, and only one worked, and they still liked it, which was fun. But it's like, the technology has to be right as well. And in fact, at that stage, we were putting our 360 VR scenarios together in a way that we wanted interactive, and there was nothing really could do it in the way that we wanted. So then we went down the whole development path, and that just blew out completely as well. So I completely understand what you're saying.
Yeah, it was interesting with the newsletter for the steel industry. My boss at the time switched it quickly to a developer based in Bulgaria. He was, well, he had a handful of them. As a guy in London, like he was the account manager.
Yeah.
So we went right onto the kind of offshoring thing early on, and had to be, and it was good in the sense that he had really good English, good guy, understood what we wanted, and could get the work done. And it was just a lot cheaper at that time. There's always somewhere where you can do this sort of stuff required. I mean, it's not always. You don't always want that situation because you must have good control of your software development as well.
And it's a matter of cost as well. Like some startups, they have very little money or no money. Sometimes it's not an option to have developers here. Like in our case, we started with one developer in the Ukraine, and then after we got developers here. And at some stage, we had them working together as well. And ultimately, we actually had one in Mexico who was really brilliant, working with two of our guys here. So we sort of mixed it up a bit, but it's all about how much can you afford as well, So obviously, when you really start taking off, then, it's better to have it locally if you can.
I mean, there's also sort of element of winging it, but you have to, I mean, really, that not putting all your eggs in one basket. It's hard. It's hard. It's very hard, but
that's a good financial lesson as well, isn't it?
You need to just spread it around. I mean, it's a lot easier these days with all the different marketplaces to find people and so forth. But at the same time, it's someone who can understand you, like literally, and you don't want someone who just says yes all the time on the end of a video call. You need to, having someone who can repeat it back to you and you understand what they're saying and we're all aligned, this sort of stuff. It can be easy in conversation with lots of people talking and it to get lost, and you hope they put it right and this sort of thing. And not being afraid to act dumb and ask so many questions to make sure you're comfortable that they've got it and they understand it. And I found that as a general rule in life as well.
It is.
There's a sort of collective thing where everyone seems to understand what's going on in a room, but
just like students in a classroom. A lot of them.
It really is.
Ask that question, but the ones that do, they're the ones that really get ahead.
That's right. And I'm a non-technical manager, and but working across technology or products enabled by technology, and I always have to go that. I find you just have to go that extra level of detail down, just not to be fobbed off. Not to say that you don't work with great people, but you do need to satisfy yourself and your own curiosity that you can understand the situation, and there are no doubts in your mind. What I hate doing is taking information at face value. I just want it to be supported by evidence or supported by some good, convincing reason why this is the best option or why we can't do something.
And I think startup founders
those questions.
Startup founders need a broad knowledge, if possible, in lots of different areas. It doesn't have to be really deep, but they have to understand, like you said, what's going on. So, they're not ripped off or, they're not going down the wrong path, etc. Now, in my case, I wasn't a developer. I understood a bit about development, just enough to be able to have a team and know if they're doing the right thing or not, So
that's right.
So look, to finish off, Richard, it's just a question around financial literacy. So financial literacy is crucial for startups, and it's something that I have to admit that I never really bothered with. I was fortunate to have my co-founder that looked after that, but usually us creatives we're not really good in that space. But financial literacy, so it's crucial for startups' long-term success, obviously. Could you share some financial management tips or lessons you've learned throughout your career that can benefit new entrepreneurs or startup founders?
You know what, I think particularly in a startup situation, I mean, it's almost just mathematics, right? It's yes, it helps to be financially literate, but it's about understanding what's coming in and what's going out, and knowing what that leaves you at the end of a month or a week. Really, that you really need to understand that, and and I would say you need to understand why you're doing something and what the benefit is financially for what you're doing as well. be quite ruthless about it. So, okay, that obviously, if you're trying to build something, there's a cost associated with that. Get that, and you must know why you're doing that and the potential financial return on doing that. But also, just when you're spending money on different promotional activities, for example, that needs to be really, put under a microscope. I think it's just, you need to know what the return is rather than just spending money on marketing.
Which is sometimes hard to measure.
Sometimes, but a lot of stuff is very measurable these days.
On the social and that area, I guess.
Digital. Yeah. I mean, really, yeah. I mean, not, I'm going to hold an event and pay for an event. Okay, that might be harder. I don't know how many people are coming, but and what they're going to do. But there's a lot of certainly digital marketing these days where you can measure responses and you've got a sense of what you're converting and this sort of thing. But really, it's back to understanding that you've got enough cash coming in. What are you going to do when you run out? Because that everything will stop.
Yes,
literally. So all right, if you're going to take it out of your mortgage, or what are you going to do? So having line of sight on that and taking steps to make sure that doesn't happen. So you either do that by cost control, or you have investors coming in to fund your vision. But really, it's there's no the difficult, complex stuff that comes with accounting is around financial reporting and how you treat various costs and this sort of thing and how you report back on it. At a startup level, though, it's about cash flow.
Yes,
it's literally about what you can see.
But that can take years sometimes in a startup for it to come in. Like I know startups have been going for a long time and they are making sales, but they haven't even broke even yet after maybe 8 years.
Yeah, it's a long time. Yeah. So, certainly to be at least cash flow break even by then would be good. Just otherwise it starts to look like you've got something that sort of half works, unless there's going to be some sort of step change in customer traction and adoption. Again, so it does come back to customers really, and having people to pay for stuff. I mean, there's obviously sort of tips and techniques like, great, you've sold something, make sure you get their money in as well.
Yeah.
Don't the classic kind of big end of town companies in Australia will often take 120 days payment terms. That's what our payment terms are, or 90 days, this kind of stuff. So do be aware that kind of thing happens, that you'll be sitting on your hands waiting for that money to come in. And even then they might have forgotten to have processed the invoice and it'll have to go into next month's run. So there's managing cash receipts is important as well. So you have to stay close to your customer on that. Likewise with payments, you need to spread it out, make sure you pay, satisfactorily in a way that everyone's happy and in line with your contracts, but in a way that is effective as well for your cash flow. So there's always a big juggling exercise that goes on there. But tactically there are those sort of things, but ultimately you need that line of sight to know that I might run out. So what am I going to do about it?
Yeah. And if I go back to my business before the startup, before I had my co-founder looking after the financial side, it was terrible. I would just wouldn't even look at my bank account. And then if I went to pay something, it didn't work. I said, I need to top up some money or get some more cash flow or whatever.
Yeah.
That was really bad. So, it's not a good idea. Don't copy that, but try to get as much financial.
No, that's right. It's bad. I mean, it is the control, and I mean, certainly avoiding it.
Or do the basics, and also don't spend stuff you don't need to. Spend it on the things that are going to help you to get ahead.
You need to be very clear about your objectives and what you're focusing on, and not. I mean, I remember there was a sort of famous story with the business I mentioned back in 2001. They went into receivership. The day the receivers came in, there was a new delivery of Italian leather chairs for the boardroom arriving.
Yeah, you hear all those stories.
Like .com largesse, right?
Yeah.
Suddenly the music stopped.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what's
Um,
interesting? I interviewed another fellow founder that he unfortunately had a massive problem with actual blockchains, a bridge between two blockchains, and his whole business collapsed.
mm,
Um, and he was saying, yeah, we got a big office. It was 35 of us, really nice office. He said, yeah, I should have seen then that was like something was going to happen, because that's often when something happens, when you get all the big office and all the big expenses,
yeah, yeah.
So if you don't need it, you know,
You don't
don't
need it.
spend it.
You
You
don't. You
hear
never
about
need it. I
startups
mean, it's
spending like a fortune
ego.
getting a good
Um,
logo or something and spending like weeks
yeah.
on it. It's like, no, that's,
You don't need it. There's so much
no,
stuff out there that you can use these
yeah,
days to sort of get
yeah,
you close enough, or 90% of the way there.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
very low cost, and you don't
yeah.
need to be having flashy. I mean, it's
With AI,
yes,
you can
it's very
actually
obvious,
generate
but
a lot of stuff.
it just means you're going to need more money from somewhere. If you've got a whole load of money in the first place from your investors, and you think, well, great, happy days. But nonetheless, every time you're going back asking for more, you're giving up more of your business, no
Exactly.
less of it,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and you might not be able to get it as well.
yeah.
So,
All right.
always
Well,
be cautious. Be
yeah.
cautious.
Good advice, Richard. Really appreciate that, and really appreciate you taking your time today to do this interview. And well, just before we go, is there anything else that you want to add?
Oh, one thing we did talk about intellectual property, but mostly around copyright. And I've mostly worked in copyright industries, but there are,
Mm.
of course, other types of intellectual property as
Mm.
well. One thing I have seen over the past, not in businesses I've worked in, but certainly in others that I may have advised over the years, just spend on, in terms of money that founders have spent on registering patents. And
Yes, I know all about that. We went down there and
you
blew
really
a
need
whole
to
lot of
make sure
money.
you've got a
Yeah,
business there
yeah,
first before you want to start going off securing all the patents for your novel inventions, because
yeah.
you know there often you see you can spend tens of thousands of dollars on this stuff,
We did.
and you might not ever
Mm.
use it for any commercial purpose, and
No.
nor will anyone else, by the way.
Yeah.
So
And you got to
it's
be careful of the advice as well, because sometimes they'll say, "Oh, yeah, you can patent this as your IP," and then it may not be as clear as you think. And that was in our case. In the end, it's like,
right.
and that
You
was
can get
tens of
yourself
thousands of
tied up
dollars.
in knots with that kind of stuff
Yeah,
when
yeah,
actually what you really need to be doing is building something and getting a customer using it. And of course, patents are really valid and they're there for a reason. But when you're very early stage
yeah.
and there's sort of a couple of you sitting around with this great invention,
Mm,
I think you want to be trying to go through all the good stuff of testing the concept and getting to an MVP stage before you start
yeah,
pocket. I
I
mean, it's
agree.
fine if you're Apple or someone like that, where you've
Yeah,
got deep
no,
pockets to do this
yeah.
stuff. But
And
if
then
you're
every
otherwise, you
country,
can because
it,
you can create and register patents with agents that
yeah,
describe your invention brilliantly and beautifully, and then
mm,
you'll spend a fair amount of money on that, and then the reality is they were of no commercial value, and you need to make a judgment on that.
yeah,
But
no,
it's
exactly. Yeah,
whether it's even worth going down that pathway.
yeah, yeah, and quite often it's not. I wouldn't say for everybody.
Correct.
I'm not an expert at all in that space, but something you really have to think about and really have to find out a lot more about before. And on top of that, to register here in Australia is one cost. If you want to go overseas, every country
Oh, then you go into other
there's
territories.
huge
Yeah.
costs if you want to register in like the US and the
Yeah,
European Union.
yeah.
There's so much cost involved.
I have seen quite a bit of that before, and again, actually going back to sort of ASX early stage businesses and micro caps, you see them that are startups in many instances, perhaps not even scale ups, and they're still another great news. We've registered another patent, and yeah, maybe it'll be really good and it'll make some money, but it's not cash coming into the business today.
Yeah, yeah. I
Um,
think in hindsight, in our particular case, we would have been much better spending that money on more development and particularly on sales, actually, because that's where we lacked in sales and
yeah,
marketing. And so I think we would have, it would have been better to spend that money on that. And on
yeah,
top of that, the whole period that we were doing that, we couldn't really show much. So we couldn't demonstrate much either. which was a
Yeah.
real issue. And then we came up to COVID, and so we hadn't been able to demonstrate, and then COVID hit, so yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
this is what
that
you
was a
start.
very
This is
exceptional
what this
time.
podcast's all about, Rich. It's all about learning from mistakes. That's a massive mistake that we made. Not that everybody would be the same, but really look into it well and make sure that you've really got something there, and that you should be spending that money now or later when you
I think
need more.
just being very comfortable that you're doing something for which there is a market. And I think from everything that you've told me today, it was about getting into being one of the first to market with a really sophisticated product that was not yet proven. Like, we all agree it'd be brilliant, 3D is amazing, metaverse and all that stuff, but very early days. And then finding the right early day customers to be using it, who are prepared to pay. Because until it's really scaled up and the costs have come down, you've got something that's quite sort of boutique and expensive, and you want to find the right kind of customers who will pay to develop content and use that kind of service.
And your thing about mining, that would have been a good area, probably health as well. But
it's never too late. It's never too late. It's there's always obviously you're doing the podcast, but there's always getting the fit right is super important.
So, Richard, look, a wealth of knowledge. Really appreciate your time today. There's a lot to unpack in there, and a lot of really good information for startups that can help them not to make the same mistakes that like other startups have made. And your advice is invaluable because you have so much experience in that space. So I really appreciate you coming on today, and maybe you can come back in a year and we can discuss copyright and AI, and because it'll probably be massive changes by then.
Keep moving and changing. That we can be certain. And it's going to be it certainly will be a big thing as well. There's no doubt about it. It's the next generation's big thing.
Absolutely. All right, well, thanks so much, Richard, and thanks for coming on, and probably I'll catch up again in maybe 6 months or a year.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
All right, thanks very much.